Hello everybody, this is the Wikstrand. So, my opinion regarding westerns is usually the following. If it isn't, directed by Sergio Leone, and if it is not, directed by Tarantino, or if it's not starring somebody like, Clint Eastwood or something like that, I usually doesn't have, a higher opinion about it. And new or old, I don't have that high expectations on a new western coming out. That's why I was so surprised how fucking amazing 3:10 to Yuma was when it was released in, what was it, 2007, 2008 or something like that, by James Mangold, starring Christian Bale and Russell Crowe. But I then found out that there actually is an original to this one that was made in the 1950s. And unfortunately for that movie, I watched that movie after seeing, the remake. And I'm gonna have to say this. The remake is so much better than the original. Now, what is the difference between them and what is the story about? That's what we're gonna find out today, because today we're taking a look at 3:10 to Yuma. Played by Van Heflin, is a poor farmer that lives in 1880s Arizona. He has a lot of problems. The drought is killing him. He doesn't have 2 cents to rub together, and the bank is soon going to take his farm unless he can stamp out cash he doesn't have. Dan pretty much needs a miracle, and a miracle might show up in the form of Ben Wade. Ben Wade is an outlaw who has just robbed a stagecoach nearby, but he's apprehended by the law. And the stagecoach line is, offering anybody who will escort him to the nearest town so he can, get on the train that he can, stand trial in Yuma. And Dan volunteers to do this. Now, he isn't, some gruff gunslinger or something like that. He's a farmer, not a coward. And he realizes that this money will not only save his farm, but it will also, save his family from, poverty and stuff like that. So him and Ben Wade takes off towards this town in order to, make sure that he gets on the train. But there is a problem, because they didn't get Wade's entire gang, and the gang is hunting them because they want to release their fearless leader. And Wade is telling Dan that they will kill you, and it's better that you just let me go, and I will pay you money, and you don't have to risk your life for this. But Dan won't have it, and there is a strange bond that is formed between these two men as they get closer and closer to the railroad junction. And at first, he just thinks that Wade is just this pompous outlaw who thinks that he is something that he is not. And Wade realizes that Dan is not a pushover, and he may be a farmer, but as I said, not a coward. So what will happen? Will the gang, find them and, free their fearless leader, and will Dan be just, dead in a ditch? Or will he actually get to this train and stand trial in Yuma? And will the drought ever end? This is essentially what 3:10 to Yuma is. Now, this movie was made during the time period in Hollywood where they were making the so-called revisionist westerns, which was essentially a new way of looking at the old western legends. And here was, more grayscale in how the characters were portrayed. There were less black hats, white hats. There was also a lot more allegorical stories and characters in this one. I think that this is probably the best revisionist western I've ever seen. The most famous is probably the movie High Noon with Gary Cooper. That is one of the most overrated and boring westerns I've ever seen, but that is a story for another time. Now, what do I think about 3:10 to Yuma? I think it is a pretty good story. Elmore Leonard usually, write these very fascinating stories that, that can be pretty good movies if done correctly. I really like the characters of this movie. Dan Evans is a pretty good character, but Ben Wade is the real standout, played by Glenn Ford. I really like his characters, but there is no way of getting around these things. These two guys are not Christian Bale and Russell Crowe. And this movie sure as hell is not directed by James Mangold, so it is an uphill battle for it to go. But as old-timey western goes, I think this is one of the better ones I've seen, maybe even the best. But it is difficult to look past James Mangold's version of this one, especially when it comes to the ending, because I really love the remake's ending. I don't know if that is closer to Leonard's original story or not, but I just think that the ending of the new movie is so much better than the original one that it is difficult to overlook. Maybe if I would have seen them in, you know, chronological orders, I would have been taken to the ending of the original one better than I did now, but I don't know. It is still an entertaining movie. It moves on pretty nicely. There are these occasions where maybe the 1950s style of acting shines through a little bit too much and things becomes a little goofy and things becomes a little bit, why did they do that? And was that the best take they could have done? And so forth. But in other sequences, I think that, you know, the character acting really shines through, and, you know, both these guys put on pretty good performances, but once again, no Bale, no Crow. There are these great character moments, and there are some pretty damn tense sequences in this movie that really lifts this movie up from, you know, the rest of, you know, the 1950s when it comes to westerns, which is not really my decade when it comes to, you know, westerns. I prefer the 1960s and the 1970s when it comes to really good westerns, but that is a story for another time. If you've never seen this one and have only seen, you know, the remake, there is no real reason to see this movie. But if you have not seen this one and have not seen you know, the remake, I would just watch the remake. If you've never seen this movie and really like your, you know, old-timey westerns, I think this movie is pretty damn excellent. But, you know, for me, this is not a movie I need to rewatch or anything like that. I have the remake, which I think is the superior movie, and in other words, this movie feels not as important to, you know, rewatch or revisit or anything like that. But it is a really good western, especially for, you know, the time period when it is made. I'm not a really huge fan of, you know, the John Ford westerns or the movies with John Wayne or, you know, movies like that. But I think they're okay, but I think this one is significantly better. One thing that also happened in revisionist history was the fact that the bad guys had a tendency of being a little less, you know, evil and a little bit more sympathetic than in your usual western. And, you know, the sheriff, who usually was, you know, this brave and, you know, tough guy, could sometimes be a coward and he could be corrupt and stuff like that. I like that idea of, you know, more shades of gray. But usually, you know, these revisionist westerns were not really my bag because they were too slow and they were a little bit corny, and, you know, sometimes they were really boring. Would I have been more positive to this movie if I hadn't seen the remake before I saw this movie? Almost 100% certain, but I'm still giving 310 to Yuma, 57 points. I still think this is a pretty good classic western with some pretty good performances and some pretty excellent cinematography. I've always been critical towards movies that, you know, uses black and white after, you know, color has been invented. But in this case, it works a little bit better because, you know, the cinematography is so sharp and the contrast between black and white were so sharp. In this case, I'm not as bothered by it as I am in many other movies that I've seen that, you know, utilizes black and white photo. But still, I think that could have helped the movie becoming even better, but what do I know? So I'll see you next time for, well, so and so reviewing, well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.